Hey, everybody, welcome to Podcasty For Me, the podcast about film, culture, politics, and Clint Eastwood, where we watch every film directed by and or starring American filmmaker Clint Eastwood and explore how they speak to their moment. And this one, the show's hosted by two guys, and one of the guys, my name's Jake Serwin.
I'm one of the guys. My name is Ian Ryan.
How you doing, man?
How's your week?
Well, I was listening to as we record this, our most recent release was the Mystic River episode, on which I noticed I had an insanely dry mouth. So I'm gonna have a little.
You're bringing one of the wettest mouths in the whole
industry
now.
I'm gonna lubricate today. Hold on.
Yeah. Yep. Something that listeners love to hear is just a lot of moisture on mic.
Well, I'm gonna cut this part out, but I just want everybody to know I'm glug glug glugging here. It's nice. You know the famous noise you make when you drink the water.
Sure. Yep.
Who was the first guy to do that? Do you think
it must have killed? Everyone else was thinking, yeah, it does feel like that. You're right.
It does, yeah. Bunch of guys cupping their hands at like a little puddle.
Mm-hmm.
Sort of. They cut that out of 2001 when one of the ape guys, one of those French mimes. You know, those were all French mimes.
I did not know
Talking
that.
about 2001: A Space Odyssey on the podcast today. Just kidding. How you doing, man? How was your week?
I was good. Good. Kind of unremarkable. Just working in the mines, you know, making it happen.
You got a new job?
That would have been pretty exciting, actually. Would have loved to report on that.
Is there any mining going on down there in Oaxaca? What are they mining?
Oaxaca, I'm not sure, but in Mexico.
I mean, Mexico,
mining's
of course.
Kind of a big deal.
Big country. Lots of different stuff to extract. Send on up here.
That's generally been our country's attitude. That's right.
Let's bring our guest in to the fold, sort of at a midpoint between, at least where I am, and the very large country of Mexico. By no means a midpoint between Los Angeles and Oaxaca. Our guest today, a writer, lecturer at San Diego State University, and the managing director of the Pacific Arts Movement, which puts on the San Diego Asian Film Festival, which is happening very, very soon. Welcome to the show, Glenn Heath Jr.
Hey, Glenn. Welcome.
Thanks for having me, guys.
How you doing, Glenn?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Great to be here.
Very excited to have you on the show. Today we're talking Flags of Our Fathers. But first, we got to do our stupid thing that we do. The two questions. Were you able to prepare a question for us, Glenn?
I did. My question, I struggled with this because the prompt was so broad and the possibilities endless, which I think is the point.
Yeah, we try to make it hard for the guests.
But for both of you who are spending so much time with Clint Eastwood, my question for you is, what is your least favorite Clint Eastwood movie?
Breezy.
Okay, yeah.
Fortunately,
he did beat me to it. Yeah, that's
instantly Breezy.
I was expecting a little bit more of a struggle, but
no. Well, I was talking to if you can believe it, my girlfriend's father, also a Clint Eastwood fan. You can believe that a man that I know in his 60s has some Clint Eastwood fondness. We were talking yesterday, and he asked me the same question, actually, and it was just immediate. Breezy, because there's no Clint in it. It's before he develops most of the sort of thematic interests that pop up again and again in these films. I don't think it has a ton to actually say about much of anything. It's obviously icky. Also, I don't know how revealing it is of the man's peccadillos when it comes to dating young women. So I think if it had Clint in it, in the William Holden role, it might be at least more of an object for study. But for me, Breezy is just, I'm not going back to that one, I don't think.
Yeah, no reason to.
What about you, Ian?
You're right. Well, if Breezy's taken just out of respect,
you can say Breezy.
Interest. No, I shan't. I think Firefox, despite the fact that it has some interesting things in it.
You wound me.
I know. And look, the idea of a Soviet espionage film sounds great, right? But I think it's just kind of a slog, or maybe either The Enforcer or Magnum Force. Those are also pretty weak.
I think
it's 2 and 3.
Magnum Force is pretty weak because The Enforcer, you at least get Tyne Daly.
It's true. Yeah.
What about you, Glenn? Do you have a least favorite Clint?
Yeah, I was going back through the list, but I mean, I had forgotten about Breezy completely, so maybe that's to your point.
Yeah.
I probably haven't seen it for 20 years, but it was definitely icky when I saw it to begin with. I think of recent films, of stuff I've watched in the last 10 years, Bloodwork is probably my least favorite.
Again, I'm being wounded from all sides. I love Bloodwork. We just talked about it, but
it just seems like the messiest and kind of the cheesiest and the slimiest. And usually I like those things, but with this one, it just didn't work for me.
It has a phoned-inness that I think appreciate, but I also know that It's like one of those things where, like, you know, sometimes I'll watch videos of people trying exotic foods, or foods that are exotic to me, I should say. And they'll say, oh, it's wonderfully slimy. I love this sliminess. And I'll think, well, I would probably agree that it's slimy, but I don't like that. And I won't say where in the world those foods are from for personal safety reasons from Ohio. But yeah, I mean, I love blood work. I think I might also have sort of a sentimental fondness to it. It was one of the early Clints where I was like, oh, this guy's
it's up to something
more interesting than I thought.
Well, I kind of understand. I probably generally prefer an interesting half-assed film to something where somebody tries really hard and makes a very boring product. That's, you know, it's just never going to be worth my time to me.
Yeah, absolutely. No.
Speaking of interesting half-assed, welcome to Podcasting for me, I should say. Sorry, Glenn, I stepped on you with my dumb joke.
Great to be here.
What are you sipping on over there?
Sipping on water, or actually a cherry Coke. But I have both water and Coke.
Okay. It was a very confusing moment when you held up the cherry Coke and said sipping on a water. I thought maybe we had to do like some space
like
work imagination
or something.
It's water.
Yeah.
I've got both next to me. So
okay. All right.
I'm trying to cut down on my borderline criminal Diet Coke consumption. And so I was
it's a struggle.
Enviously at your delicious beverage. And you got a sip on right now?
I got just a traditional, very boring water coffee set up here. It's like podcast fuel.
1 and 2, or is this some kind of a special drink you've invented?
No, this is a 1 and 2. This is not like a very wet Americano or something. Water and coffee.
I got nothing for that. Thank you for the question, Glenn. I have one for you guys. This is involved. So if at any point you become confused,
ask for help.
Let me know and I'll explain further.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So in my apartment building where I live, I'm a renter. It costs $4 total to wash and dry a small load of laundry.
Okay.
And I was reading online that for like $12 on Amazon or whatever, you can get a universal key that opens the little box where the coins go. Not to take the coins out, but because when you open the box, there's some kind of a hinge switch that puts the machine in price setting mode. And at that point, you can set the price to 0 and do your laundry for free and then just set it back to what it was when you're done. My question, and if you're my landlord, this is a parody that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Do you guys think that I'm going to get caught if I do this?
Well, now you are.
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah.
Well, extremely hopeful. I love the optimism that our podcast will have penetrated far enough to have reached Jake's landlord by the time Jake has been kicked out of the apartment or killed.
One of those classic landlords that's so abstracted from my experience that I don't know what their name is. I don't know if it's a person or like a conglomerate.
I thought you were going to ask about the ethics of this, and I will say that...
Yeah, I knew you would think that I was asking that, and no, it's not. It's just, do you think I can get away with it?
Well, I'm going to answer the question that I imagined anyway. I think probably you could honorably pay like 25 cents or like 50 cents a load, something to sort of like, you know, you're like subsidizing the water costs and the upkeep and whatever, but then you can still set it back to... In
Rainbows style.
Yeah,
the Radiohead pay as you pay what you can model. I like that.
Yeah,
my landlord is Johnny Greenwood. So not as cool as you guys thought, huh?
Yeah.
Well, thank you for answering, Glenn. What do you think? You think Ian's onto something?
Oh, I mean, with this day and age, with everything prices what they are, I'm not going to begrudge you for getting in there and you know, maybe do it every other time just so that you don't feel.
Yeah, there you go.
So you don't feel too bad about it. But if you're cutting your costs in half, I mean, I think that's fair, you know, considering how expensive everything is.
Right.
I think Glenn's strategy combines the best of both not getting caught and also, you know, responsible pricing, because then it's 50% of the times that you're in there, and in case somebody walks in, you're paying the full price. It's not in some kind of weird open coins are exposed mode or whatever you're talking about.
The coins are exposed.
Just have your coins ready to be exposed. And then,
it's my little satchel.
I've got coins right here.
Yesterday I did the classic move that is not at all humiliating to do in your 30s of driving 40 minutes to my girlfriend's parents' house to use their laundry machines. That's why we were talking about Breezy.
That's what you get.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're very nice. They made us lunch. They're lovely. But
that's awesome. I just meant to talk about Breezy.
Yeah. Yep.
Exactly. Well, cool. Thank you for that. That is the 2 questions. I'll report back on if I ever even get my act together to buy one of these keys. My worry also is if I buy a key and it's not as universal as it says.
Well, then
I'm getting to, what am I getting to, $25?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Fair enough. All right. Flags of Our Fathers. We're getting into it. Now, Glenn, first of all, what is you've hinted here that you're a Clint aficionado of some renown, but what's your Clint relationship and your relationship to this film? Because we booked this months and months ago, but you threw this one out as
I did. I remember when you both reached out to me, and thank you again. I feel honored to be talking about a director that I do care a great deal about.
The honor's ours.
But I think I had watched it in 2021 again, and it had moved me to basically tears by the end of it. And that was not the original, back in 2006, the original reaction I had. And so I was more fascinated, I think, with that recent reaction, that experience. And so when you brought up films to talk about, this was the one that I felt like had the most meat on the bone, just of maybe films that aren't considered some of his best work traditionally. And I think there has been a little bit of a reappraisal, but my relationship with Clint Eastwood goes back, I want to say, probably to when I was 12. I saw a lot of movies when I was younger. My mom and dad were very liberal with me seeing R-rated films at a young age. And so...
Do you remember a first R-rated film, by the way? Just
yes.
Or an early one?
It was yesterday, Terminator 2. When I was 10.
Good pick.
One of the classic first R-rated films, I feel like. It's like an R-rated film that came with action figures,
Yeah, and just the special effects too were so groundbreaking for that time. And so that was the time frame that I was seeing a lot of these movies that were blowing my mind in terms of just what film was, what was possible with film. And so in 1993, I went and saw Perfect World in the theaters when I was 12.
Oh, wow.
Okay. Which is still my favorite Clint Eastwood movie to this day.
That's a great pick.
Yeah. And so that movie has stuck with me throughout my various journey through my career in film, through my love of film, as a critic, as a teacher, and so that one I keep coming back to, but that was seeing it on 35 in a theater at such a young age. It really kind of, and I don't even know if I realized Clint had directed it until I was in maybe high school, a few years later. And so I've just always been a huge fan of his directorial work. I've always found his films to be a lot more prickly and thorny than maybe some people have given credit for over the years. And he's always up to something that is either structurally or narratively really interesting. And even thematically in the later films, dealing with kind of the cycles of violence that his persona was basically started in cinema, dealing with the guilt of that, dealing with the ramifications and the consequences of that. And I think that has led through, especially to these recent films in the last 10, 15 years. But I've always just found his films to be very, very dense. There's just a lot to go over. And he's working in a lot of the genres that you don't typically find that sort of subtext and that sort of politics and thematics. And again, I think your last guest was talking about this, was just or you guys were talking about the contradiction between his politics and his on film, the stuff that's in the movies and how there doesn't quite align all the time. And I've really tried to stick with the movies themselves and let those speak for themselves, because it's a little too much to get into who is the man versus who is the filmmaker, and who is, where does the work start and the man end, that sort of thing. So I've just always found a lot of empathy in his movies, a lot of self-reflection. I think there is a lot of this guilt about some of the violence that he has popularized, and especially in the early Westerns and the Dirty Harry stuff.
This is maybe peak empathetic Clint. This diptych of Flags of Our Fathers and Letters from Iwo Jima. A little peek behind the curtain. We have recorded the Letters episode already for extremely dull scheduling reasons, but watching them back to back, it's hard to know, because I was in 2006, I was
15.
Yeah, a little dolt who was just watching PCU for the 15th time, because that was a DVD that we had. But do you remember the general feeling of finding out Clint is making a World War II sort of two-parter with Iwo Jima from the American and Japanese perspectives? Do you have any memory of that sort of moment?
I do, very vividly. I was just getting out of my master's program at the time. Went to actually SDSU to get my master's in screenwriting, and quickly learned that I didn't want to be a filmmaker. I wanted to be a critic, writer, teacher, professor, that sort of thing. But I remember when it came out, I mean, it was a huge deal that year that he had, because he's always released, there's been a few times where he's released 2 movies in 1 year.
Right.
But never to the extent that they've been speaking to each other like this.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I mean, later on it was Jersey Boys and American Sniper. And, I mean, I wrote like a huge thing on how those movies are connected. But these two were actually specifically connected.
Explicitly, intentionally.
Yeah.
Don't have
And
to
so
speculate as much.
So this was definitely a huge kind of gamble. And I remember seeing Flags of Our Fathers on the first day that it came out. I was visiting a friend in the Orange County, and I actually, on my way home, driving home from his house, I stopped at a theater on the way, and I saw Flags of Our Fathers.
Do you remember which one? I always loved the sort of pinpoint specific theater.
I don't know. It was off the 5 in Orange County. It wasn't the,
just like
the
a
big
multiplex.
One. Yeah, it was just
Irvine
a multiplex.
Spectrum or something.
It wasn't Irvine Spectrum. I think it was north of that. In between like Long Beach and that spot.
We'll narrow it down. We're gonna find this.
And that's what this episode's gonna be about.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and I walked out of it conflicted because I had huge anticipation. Like the trailers had been playing. It looked like it was a $90 million movie for Clint.
Yeah.
That was a huge budget for him at the time, coming off of kind of Saving Private Ryan and this wave of World War II movies. And so I don't think I was prepared. I thought it was just, I don't know if I had read the book at that point, because I read Band of Brothers, which was also a big thing at that time.
Right. Yeah,
so there were all these World War II, like ambitious, greatest generation type things happening. But I walked out of it just scratching my head a little bit. I didn't hate it, but I also didn't love it like I had expected to. And I think in hindsight, it's because the structure is so experimental.
Right.
The way that he uses flashbacks and flash forwards and kind of plays with this narrative in a way that's just like, it is incredibly jarring at times. And it could have been a disaster. Like, and the more I watch it, I mean,
easily,
having watched it like the other day again, I'm just so impressed at how nimble it is. It just goes from one storyline to the next with such efficiency and effortlessness and humanity. So at the time, I was definitely disappointed. And then when Iwo Jima came out, I really liked it, but I didn't love it as much as everyone else, because that's the movie that got all the acclaim at the time.
Right. Yeah. I feel like
everyone was shitting on Flags of Our Fathers at the time. And
right. The read is like the Japan one is the superior film.
Yeah. And so, I mean, and again, that one didn't really stick with me at all. Whereas Flags of Our Fathers has just stuck with me ever since. So I was always curious about that. Like, why didn't I like Iwo Jima as much as everybody else? And it's a fine movie. I mean, watching it again today, like it's effortlessly made. It's a little bit more on the nose for me than Flags is.
The less experimental somehow.
Yeah.
Clint making a film entirely in a language he doesn't speak.
Which there are elements of that for sure. But I just didn't, I don't know. It seemed like it was coasting off of some of the experimental stuff that Flags had done. Like they're definitely in conversation. So it's hard to say one is better than the other without kind of speaking to the fact that they are a diptych.
Exclusively piece of trivia here, but I was interested to learn that Yukari Black, the actress who is the voice of Tokyo Rose on the radio in this film, is the mother of the family with, I believe, the mother of the family with a dog in Letters from Iwo Jima. Shout out to her, Yukari Black. Come on the podcast.
She's definitely listening.
That'd be nice. Yeah. Ian, what did you think of this movie? I don't think we haven't talked about our reads on it.
Yeah, we haven't. You know what? Unfortunately, I think I'm a little bit in 2006 Glenn territory here. I'm cooler on this. Yeah. I think both of you guys.
Banish you to Long Beach County or whatever.
I'm getting a distinct impression that maybe you guys can rescue it for me a little bit. I will say that the experimental stuff is the stuff that I love the most. I can say that very easily. Even if it was sometimes hit or miss, I was always so happy just to like see Clint try it. That's very satisfying for me. The end is representative of the elements in the film that I like the least. So we'll obviously get to that eventually.
Well, I was actually going to suggest that at the end of this podcast, we all go run into the ocean in military issue white boxers that immediately become transparent when they get wet.
That part I'm okay with, but
frolic as brothers.
Should we also hug our bedridden fathers and agree that actually we're good fathers and good sons to each other? That's what I want to know about.
Yeah. I mean, we're jumping around, but I don't know that that's the worst thing to tell somebody who's dying. I don't know. Call me a sap, but I think whether or not that's true, just saying, I'm proud of you, son, when you're dying, or I'm proud of you, dad, when the dad is dying.
Well, he actually says, I wish I was a better father, which kind of gets to the point of the fact that there's so much lost kind of along the way. But I'm sure we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
All right.
This is a bit of a insight into my pathetic inner life, but I'm watching this movie and I throw this on. This was before we watched Letters. I threw this on for the first time. And so confident was I that our friend of the show, Aaron from Hit Factory, so confident was I that he had said it was a masterpiece and I should watch it as soon as I could, that within 5-10 minutes, I was like, damn, this is one of those ones where you throw the movie on and you're like, oh, I'm in a master's hands here. This is going to be a masterpiece. Loved the film, bowled over by it.
Yep.
Immediately texted Aaron to say, you're right, dude. That's one of the movies where immediately, like within minutes, I knew that this was going to be one of the great ones. And he texted me back. Never really cared for it. So I had misremembered his response. And I guess that gave me permission, because someone whose opinion I respect, partially because it simply isn't mine. I thought he had given me permission to like this one. Yeah. So
it was probably me. It was probably me.
It was probably you. Yeah, it probably mixed you guys up.
Yeah.
Somebody I was DMing with on Twitter said the movie was good. It must have been, I don't know. But yeah, I think this movie is terrific. It makes me almost like Ryan Phillippe. And I think that structure you're talking about, Glenn, is, to me, feels like sort of Citizen Kane meets PTSD, Citizen Kane X PTSD, like a streetwear collab. And I think that to me, like, I guess I'll jump to part of my big brain read here, but the structure where the storylines often, like the transitions between scenes, are on sort of PTSD style triggers. Like there will be a firework that goes up and then it on the soldier field, and then all of a sudden we're in Iwo Jima and it's a Japanese flare or something. The film is, because it's so concerned with images and their context, and it's presenting us these images out of context first, and like forcing us every time to kind of look at things the way someone seeing the photo on the front page of a newspaper would see it without its context. Like we're continually being shoved back into this, just getting an image and having to make meaning from it ourselves. And I think, especially as, sort of what you were getting at, Glenn, in talking about Clint more generally, I think it's especially poignant that this man whose whole career is sort of about trying to complicate the Man with No Name and Dirty Harry and get away from or provide more context to those images. I think it's especially moving for him to show the very difficult experience of some guys who have no choice but to go on a PR campaign pretending to be cartoon characters. So I love the film. I think it's great. And that's the end of the episode. Let's, how should we get into this? Oh, I have an idea. Okay. First of all, this movie's got so many little guys in it. There's like an insane number of guys. And I thought maybe, because we might not get to every little guy.
We can't.
Should we just shout out a couple of our favorite little guys who pop up?
I love it. Yeah,
I wrote a list.
Yeah. Glenn, let's go through the list. What do you got? Who you got?
Oh man, Scott Eastwood and John Polito are my two
John
little guys.
Polito. Love
Scott
to see
Eastwood
John Polito
in his first role.
Yeah, and he's credited as Scott Reeves, which is his mother's name.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't see that.
As if the guy doesn't
Anybody
look
would exactly
like. Yeah. Who's this 17-year-old Clint Eastwood?
Is that AI or something? Like looks
like.
Yeah.
I think he is literally 17 or something in the movie. He's like very young.
Yeah.
Great to see those guys. I love seeing Ann Dowd, a fairly early career Ann Dowd here.
Yep.
Frank Sabatka from The Wire.
Of course.
Chris Bauer is the actor's name.
Yep.
He's the guy who, in maybe one of the more on-the-nose moments that you might have objected to, Ian, he's the one who calls Ira Hayes. He says he's making a spectacle of himself.
Yep. Not the best scene in the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're happy to see him. We're happy to see Big CB.
Yeah. David Patrick Kelly as
Truman.
Mm-hmm.
Jamie Bell.
Little Jamie
Bell,
of
course.
Tintin himself.
Convincingly playing not British, although he's one of those actors where as soon as he's on screen, I'm hearing his normal voice and accent like in my heart. So, but I think he did a good job.
Yeah. Who do you got as a Truman? Do you think, who do you like better, David Patrick Kelly or Gary Oldman in his uncredited appearance in Oppenheimer? Do you guys see Oppenheimer?
I did.
Yeah.
Who do you like better?
I'm going with David Patrick Kelly.
I'm gonna second that as well. Yeah.
Thirding it. I don't like Gary Oldman very much. We'll get into it.
And Truman, not a famously outsized character, and I think it's impossible for Oldman to like rein it in beyond a certain level.
Yeah, he's so much mustard on the same. It's mostly it's like a bowl of mustard with a little bit of bread in it. And you got any guys? We miss any guys for you?
Ned Eisenberg as the photographers. Joe Rosenthal, I like that. Sorry to
he was in $1 Million Baby as well. He was Sally.
Right, a bigger, like more significant role. But I had missed that he died last year, and I guess was working up until his death to try to pay for his medical bills and stuff. So I'd like to shout him out.
Yeah, shout out.
And then I first recognized Paul Walker's voice. Just like, I don't even know what he said, but it was so immediately Paul Walker. Exactly.
I mean, Paul Walker. Walker has one of the most like Clint, all war is hell, even the just war lines when he's the one explaining that the guy who's fallen overboard is probably just going to drown because militarily they don't have the resources to stop and pick this guy up.
And just because you're calling that scene out, I'm going to say this is like the swivel for me in this film, where you get the first part of that scene I loved. And then at the conclusion of that scene, and I wrote it down because this is represented what I didn't like, is I think Ryan Phillippe saying so much for no man left behind. And that was the stuff that I was not into. So,
well, this is a Paul Haggis script too, right? So
exactly, which I'm going to lay a lot of blame at his feet. So you're right, Glenn. I agree with you. But the first half of it is masterful.
We're very comfortable laying blame at Paul Haggis's feet. We should say, so like Bridges of Madison County, and I think like A Perfect World, this originates as a Steven Spielberg project. Mm-hmm. He buys the rights to the book Flags of Our Fathers, written by James Bradley. A little bit disappointed that Tom McCarthy didn't bring the outsized Wisconsin accent that James Bradley has in the special features. He didn't bring that into the film, but
too bad.
An actor's choice. So Spielberg brings on this guy, William Broyles, to work on the script with him. William Broyles, who wrote Apollo 13, Castaway. He's one of, I assume, 80 people who worked on the Tim Burton Planet of the Apes film with Mark Wahlberg. Unfaithful, the late Adrian Lyne film. Late in his career, he's not dead. And also the film from hell, The Polar Express, which should be rounded up like the E.T. game and buried in the desert. I think that movie is
all Prince
against God. So they work on the script together, and then somehow Clint comes on because Spielberg, I think, might just like at this point maybe he is confused about which World War II stuff he's working on because he's done. So many World War II projects at this time, as you mentioned, Band of Brothers, Saving Private Ryan, Pacific shows up in here at some point. I mean, Schindler's List is a World War II film. He's become kind of the cultural interpreter of World War II, for better or worse. And I don't know, he gets stuck somewhere. So Clint comes on, but he calls up Paul Haggis. And Haggis tells this story on the special features that's very self-effacing in a way that is now gross, knowing what we know about Paul Haggis. But he's talking about how he gets a call on his cell phone and he hears a voice say, "It's Clint." And he's like, "Yeah, I know which Clint it is." He says, I want you to read this book, see what you think. So he reads the book. He says, "I think it's good." Clint says, "Okay, great. I'd love you to take a pass at adapting it, but I got to talk to my partner." And Haggis is like, "Who's Clint's partner?" And asks around everybody he knows, and nobody, like, Clint Eastwood doesn't have a partner. What are you talking about? And Clint calls him back and he said, "Okay, I gave the script for $1 Million Baby to Steven, and he liked it, so he wants to meet." And Haggis like, "Steven who?" And Clint goes, oh, that's Spielberg. Which is very funny. It's still sort of impossible to me to imagine that Clint Eastwood and Steven Spielberg are buddies. They're just like longtime pals, but they are. And so then Haggis is brought in to rewrite the Spielberg Broyles script, is how the behind the scenes stuff sort of presents it. And then they whip it all up. I don't know if they shoot anything. They actually shoot anything on Iwo Jima because it is now like a military base for both the Japanese and the U.S. military. We get into this a little bit more on our Letters episode, but to the extent that they shoot anything there, I think it's like establishing shots. And the majority of the film is shot in Iceland because it has similar geothermal activity. And then, of course, like all over the country because they have to shoot at Soldier Field. And a lot of it was shot in and around Barstow, California, interestingly. I guess just because you can make the sand there look like all kinds of stuff. And yeah, I guess let's get into the plot of the film a little bit. Unless, Ian, did you have something to say?
No, well, we can decide collectively whether we want to talk about this now or save it. But I'm not sure you fully articulated that the original book written by James Bradley, the son of John Bradley, one of the Ryan Phillippe character here, it's a book about the actual event itself. And like you're saying, a lot of things that come up in the film, right? It's the use in the Seventh War Bonds push and the like misunderstandings around it and the manipulation of the image and all these things. And then also just James Bradley's relationship with his father and sort of like the frame narrative, although I think because it's employed in a very non-traditional way, which one of the aspects I liked is around the son of John Bradley going to like collect these stories, right? So a lot of this we're hearing are like recounted tales. The part I'm not sure if we want to save or not is, of course, I think this just adds depth to the movie. I liked discovering this.
I know what you're...
John Bradley, not one of the people who raised the flag, discovered.
There have been subsequent Marine investigations where they like apparently looked at, there was also color film, like color 8 or 16 millimeter film shot of the flag raising, and they compare like shots where you can see people's faces before they put the flags up, and they determine, oh, this guy's helmet is like unclasped, so it must be him. And like Bradley always wore his medical bags on this side of his hip, and so it can't be him.
Well, just to give credit where it's due, this was initially discovered by some of the history weirdos we make fun of on our Iwo Jima episode, the people who are maybe too into this stuff for the wrong reasons.
Right.
And from what I understand, they were censured by the Marines, basically saying like, well, no, hold on, we have to conduct our own investigation before this becomes public. And then they ultimately confirmed that those people were right.
An internal investigation always more trustworthy, I find.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and wasn't Rainey also not
correct?
Rainey Gagnon also not.
Yeah,
one of them. It was one of the other guys was, what's the guy's name? The Joseph Cross character, Franklin Sousley.
So of the 3 principals in the film and the 3 survivors who went on the campaign, Ira Hayes was the only one of them who really raised the second flag.
Yes,
which adds a whole other level to
I know. I kind of liked this. Yeah.
I mean, devastating
to the film. Yeah.
Yeah, because this, you get this whole like greater good. The film is in part about how working for the greater good invariably destroys the people representing the lesser good, at least in certain circumstances. Obviously, like we should take all of Jeff Bezos's money away, but when it's to some guy who works at a funerary home in Wisconsin or whatever, gotta acknowledge this guy's humanity as well. So we got this kind of Kane-esque frame narrative where Tom McCarthy, the director of Spotlight, which we talked about a fair bit on our Mystic River episode, which also features a couple of the people from this film, John Slattery and Len Cariou, who plays Cardinal Law in that film, the Archbishop or whatever of Boston, who let all of this child abuse happen, and also famously attended the confirmation of Doughboys host Mike Mitchell.
Yes. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Len Cariou in this plays, God, he's done so much television. Okay. He's a Canadian actor who plays Beach, the elder Beach, the elder John. Okay. What's that three name guy? John Benjamin Hickey, the elder of the Marine PR guy, who's not
like handler.
John Slattery.
Who's not Slattery. Yeah.
Len Cariou, by the way, one of several people in the movie, several of the older men in the movie played the lead role of Sweeney Todd in various productions.
Okay.
You ever heard of this guy? It's like the demon barber of Fleet Street, they call him.
I'm familiar with him.
Really weird. It's just like, there's like 2 or 3. And then another one was played by Bob Gunton, who was in Absolute Power or something, like another Clint movie. There's Clint's surrounded by Sweeney's Todd. I don't understand it. But he's going around all these old guys. Glenn, you're down there in San Diego. I assume you run into a fair amount of naval, self-mythologizing. There's a lot of these Navy ships are down there. I don't know. That stuff always icks me out. As somebody who used to live in Northern Virginia. I've seen a fair amount of military history stuff. I don't know. Does that play into this at all? As like a San Diegan, the obviously impossible self-mythologizing of the armed forces?
I mean, we're kind of surrounded by it for sure, just with Camp Pendleton, and then I live probably 2 miles away from the Miramar Air Base, so they just had the air show, which was just like terrorizing my kids, flying over. So it is kind of all encompassing. I mean, this is a military town, has been for a long time, so there is a little bit of that here. But I mean, I don't know. For me, this movie, what makes it so interesting is watching it again. It seems like every aspect of it is about triage in some way. Like trying to salvage something out of like either a picture or a wounded body or a relationship. I mean, like everything is kind of about trying to save something in like the face of just these incredible horrors. And so I feel like that is a through line for me that I can always connect with.
Yeah.
Despite kind of the hammy dialogue at some times. And so that's why Ira's character is really the one I always come back to. I mean, this is like Adam Beach doing James Dean. I mean, this is just a super weepy, just heartbreaking performance. And what he has to go through, what he has to see, and what he has to perform, and what he has to, I mean, it's just the way, and Beach had previously, been in Wind Talkers and kind of played that role. Yep. But this was something far more kind of traumatic, I think, for just that character. It's the helplessness. Like Doc can't do anything about him. So it's that dichotomy between trying to save things, trying to save an image of a country, trying to save, your family financially, like, the dad that sends his kid off to war and the wife divorces him. And just the ripple effect, I think, for me is what's most interesting about kind of the way it impacts military families, the way it impacts the institution of the military. Like, how do we generate this propaganda machine to try and save the war?
Right.
And so, I think that's the through line that I always come back to is that idea. So I don't know if that helps kind of inspire a conversation
absolutely.
It's just, to me, it's important that, the main character is a corpsman, right? Like he is, the opening scene is him hearing corpsman, corpsman, corpsman all around him. He cannot find anyone. So it's that absence. Like, where is the body I'm supposed to save? And Iggy disappearing, just terrifying.
That's what's I think so wonderful, that thing about films telling you how to watch them. In the opening, we first see the flag raising on the field. We first see the simulacrum of the flag raising, and then we see him wandering on the beach in this kind of like dream, like isolated dream moment, or maybe those are flipped.
I think it comes first. I think it's Clint singing, number one.
Yes,
and then
that is number one. That's pretty,
which is jarring. But the more I listen to it, the more I love it.
Yeah, and
then it goes right into him walking around on Iwo Jima looking for bodies, and then I think it's the next step.
Yeah, then we get him
waking up in his bed.
Yeah,
basically. Well, he does. Oh yeah, he wakes up in his bed. But I mean, when we first see Phillippe, one of the first things we see is Phillippe is treating this guy whose whole shit is just blown up. Like he's basically like halfway down his rib cage is just like a cavity, but he's still alive. And Phillippe is doing a thing he does often in the film where he tells somebody they're going to be fine, regardless of whether or not that's true. Like which is its own kind of. It's not PR, but it's like this is a sort of a more justified lying than some of the lying that goes on in the movie. And then almost immediately he has to stab a Japanese soldier in like exactly the same place. So like right next to where he's saving a guy, he's killing a guy, and the Japanese guy says, "Help me." And so you just get this kind of like the absurdity and the
arbitrariness
exactly of war, and especially it's especially moving thinking about it in the context of the other half of the two-parter.
Yeah, and I think the wounded soldier looks at the wounded Japanese soldier as he expires, and Phillippe does nothing for the Japanese soldier. He just runs back to where Iggy is, and so it's kind of a harrowing scene in the contradiction of it all.
Yeah, that dimension I liked a lot. That the soldier being helped is also paying attention to that. Right? This is not just about the eyes of a few people, right? Because like you pointed out, Jake, it is a film about selective vision and how images get manipulated, or how we ourselves manipulate images from our past to try to understand things. But like you're saying, Glenn, I think to me the best parts, or my just personally favorite parts in this film about triage, are when the American war machine in particular recognizes that something is not salvageable and then, lets go of it or kicks it to the curb very violently in the case of Ira Hayes or lots of the soldiers on the battlefields. I think that's a big part of Bradley's character's struggle is recognizing like when he's not able to do anything or, when the whole effort itself may be fruitless or.
Yeah, there's a wonderful moment like this when Rainey Gagnon gets off the train and meets up with Melanie Linsky. Shout out to...
Yeah, we forgot to mention Melanie Linsky.
Yes. The Yellow Jackets. Yeah.
I would say she's not one of the little guy faces in the film.
That's true.
Another little guy, real quick, got a shout out. Christopher Curry as Harlan Block's dad. He's the dad you mentioned, Glenn, who his marriage falls apart. He, of course, is Mr. Rico, Johnny Rico's dad in Starship Troopers, another film about military propaganda.
Yep.
And delivers the phrase that inexplicably my middle school friend Mike and I would say to each other all the time. He's trying to get Johnny not to join the Marines and suggests that they can go on a vacation to Zegama Beach, which is just like a space beach. Anyway, he's also in Sully, by the way. Christopher Curry's going to come back in the wonderful film Sully. But yeah, there's a scene where Rainey gets off the train and he and Melanie Linsky and his mom, Beth Grant, from Donnie Darko and No Country for Old Men and a million other things. They're excited because they're going to go to dinner with governor or something, and then they hear on the radio that FDR has died. And so they get a phone call that he can't do this because he, sort of PR triage style, like there's a more pressing need. So of course he has to go to that. And they're disappointed, but also they get this feeling of, well, we shouldn't be disappointed. Linsky, I think her character's role throughout all of this is like the attention hound, which is not the most comfortable thing in the movie. There's not a ton. Women in this film are either weeping mothers or they're Melanie Linsky, basically.
Yeah, there's not a lot for them, but I will say for me it's softened by the fact that Rainey himself is also an attention hound, right? And it feels like even though yes, they're different types somehow, but very clearly is in that category you're talking about, Jake, of self-mythologizing, not just the entire military, but him as a figure. And then I think it's even sadder to reflect on moments like that when we recognize that his life also fizzles out, right? So it's sort of like, well, as part of the war machine, you are allowed to propagandize for our bigger mission, right? However ethical or non-ethical that may be. But the moment you try to propagandize for yourself, that's not permissible. And we're not going to really, like as a culture, support that. And he ends up being a janitor, which is honorable work, to be clear. But
which will come up later.
Not what he wants to do.
The honor of janitors will come up later on the show. That's a promise from me.
Great.
Yeah, it's crazy. This movie does something that I always appreciate, which at the end, in the credits, they show you pictures of the real people with the name of the guy who played them. I think this should be a law. Because I'm going to go look them up. Just show them to me in the theater. Don't make me do this work. But when they show the actual Rainey Gagnon, he does look, they call him Tyrone Power in the film, but this guy really looks so much like Tyrone Power. Like Jesse Bradford is like he's like a handsome guy with big eyebrows, but damn.
Yeah. Also, just in connection with that, got a real laugh out of me because we're getting the real life photos, these people of Bradley, of Hayes.
Yeah.
And then we get to John Slattery. And of course, his character is the American War Machine. So there's just like a picture of a rally right next to him.
There is no real
picture. I fucking like love Slattery.
He's so good
whenever
in this.
Slattery shows up in a movie, he's so good in this. This is like the year before Mad Men or something.
I mean, it's identical. And I say that out of love, though, right? He's playing like almost the exact same character.
But he's so good at that.
Mannerisms are the same. He is.
Yeah.
He's terrific.
I mean, he's always like the pragmatist, the disillusioned guy.
Cynic. Yeah.
But I mean, just whenever he shows up, it's like when they bring you when it's your birthday at a restaurant and they bring you a dessert that you didn't order. It's like a little treat,
It's just John Slattery yelling at you.
Yeah, exactly. With a candle in his head.
His first big scene, they're coming in and he's like trying to smooth talk him, right? To say like, I'm a guy, I get war. And he calls like, that was a fight and a half out there. It was just like such like a slimy thing to say about.
Yeah, he lives in all these awful like Georgian style hotel rooms.
Yeah, terrific.
Yeah. The whole United States government, I mean, obviously needs to be entirely reimagined, but what part of that? We need better interior decorators. We need a better scheme of like, I fucking hate the look of I mean, I love watching an Air Force One or whatever, but the look of the interior of these conference rooms where all this stuff goes down is so nasty to me. Why does it have to look like this? A better world is possible.
Not a lot of creativity, I guess.
It's like kitsch. Yeah, just European ripoff stuff. Kind of.
But like
descendant
the
of Louis XV. Yeah.
Not like you could at least go like Italianate, disgusting, opulent. Although I guess now that I think about that, there was a recent president who kind of went that way, and I didn't like it either. So anyway, Bush. Talking about what was like? Oh yeah, I had a quick Jesse Bradford sidebar. So in the making of the film on the Blu-ray, Clint says that he had seen Jesse Bradford in a few things and liked him.
Before he loves clock stoppers.
Yeah, this is my question. I need a yes or no from both of you. Do we think that Clint Eastwood saw Hackers? Ian, what do you think?
Yeah, it feels like the kind of thing that might have come across his television.
Okay. Glenn, Clint Hackers, what do you think? Yay or nay?
Maybe he saw Bring It On,
Okay.
Oh,
so Bring It On. That's coming up. What about Romeo plus Juliet, the Baz Luhrmann one? Do we think he saw this?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. I don't know if I think Clint's a big Baz head.
I don't know either, but it was a big Romeo plus Juliet. I'm sure he watched it later because later, obviously, he works with DiCaprio and J. Edgar.
It's true. Yeah.
Do we think Clint saw Bring It On? I certainly do because Francesca Eastwood would have been like 7 in 2000 when that movie came out.
Yeah.
So I bet, I strongly suspect he saw both Bring It On and Clock Stoppers at least with Francesca, if not with Scott as well. And then lastly, do we think Clint saw Swim Fan?
Ooh, that I'm not sure about.
Also not sure.
I watched Swim Fan in the since COVID. I watched Swim Fan. Could not tell you a single thing that happened in the movie. No recollection of Swim Fan. All right, that's the end of Jesse Bradford Corner. Yeah, let's get back into talking about Adam Beach a little bit. A wonderful actor, been in a million things, including Ian and I saw Suicide Squad together. He's in that very briefly, has an extremely ignominious death in that. Total waste
that's right.
A wonderful performer. Windtalkers, as you mentioned, Glenn, he's from Canada, grew up on the Lake Manitoba, Dog Creek First Nation Reserve. He is of Saulteaux Anishinaabe heritage and also a little bit of Icelandic heritage, apparently, which is interesting given that the film shot there. And I think something that makes the portrayal extremely moving is that when he was 8 years old, his mother was killed by a drunk driver. And a few weeks later, his alcoholic father drowned. It's unclear if it was intentional or not, but he is, I think there's a danger of the character. The character could easily be portrayed as the kind of stereotypical alcoholic, tragic native character. But given his own firsthand experience with this, I think there's much more of a, you really see this guy trying to just live and stay sane however he can.
Yeah, and I think the role calls for a lot of big outsized acting moments, but from what I understand, the film may actually be like a toned down version of his real experience in terms of like how much he tried to express his distaste in real time about what was happening. Of course, I'm sure you guys both know that he appeared as himself in Sands of Iwo Jima just like a few years after. Yeah, all three. But, given his discomfort,
as well.
Feels like, it's a lot to think about. And then portrayed later after his death by Tony Curtis in The Outsider. Yeah. And I don't know, from what I understand, talking to Eisenhower, he was trying to say, like, I don't like this. So it just seems like all the time he really was trying to express his frustration, the tragedy of having lost these people he cared about.
Right.
The big moment when he hugs, is it Mike's mom?
It's Ann Dowd,
Yeah. I thought, even if it is like a gigantic acting expression, a borderline maudlin or sentimental, I liked it. And it felt like combined with the moments like when he is forced to ship back out, and there's kind of like a quiet moment in the hotel room that I think presented his range as an actor and allowed us to feel like, this is a guy who is getting drunk, trying to express something that everybody else seems to be repressing or ignoring, and then is going to have moments of, 1940s buttoned up clarity also. Yeah. I liked it quite a bit.
Yeah. Like I told you before, like he's the actor that takes the center stage for me throughout. Phillippe's not particularly engaging. I mean, he's more of a kind of a vessel to get us there.
Right.
And Bradford is plays that role well, but he's not at all relatable. I mean, just in terms of you don't want to spend time with him like anyone else.
Yeah.
But Ira's, I mean, Beach's character, I think it's important that they don't show a lot of the drinking. They just show the after.
The drunkenness.
Just kind of like being in that post, like you got drunk and now you have to go do something like in front of people, performative, and the difficulty of trying to, I mean, it was probably difficult before he was drunk to try and do any of these things. And now it's even more like clumsy and just, it lends itself to this more method acting, but not in an overt way. Like you were mentioning, Ian, like it's not a big role in the sense that he, is going to win an Oscar for it or anything. Like it's a role with a lot of nuances that he is trying to play within scene to scene. And just watching the ending again today, like that scene at the end where he's at the war memorial unveiling and he stands up, he's with the other two and he looks up at Clint holds on him for a second. He looks up at the actual war memorial, which previously had been doused in chocolate or in strawberry sauce earlier in the film.
Oh, yeah.
And he looks at it and it's like a 10-second shot or like a 5-second shot. And it just, that lingering with him. And the facial expression that he makes is really powerful. And I think he's just always the one that is echoing our frustration. Like he's us, in a sense that we're just how would you make sense of all of this tragedy and all of this manipulation?
Even in that held shot, I think the other two soldiers look at him, which I like a lot because, like you're saying, like they, even as participants in this and people who are aware and also expressing critiques, they maybe also have not figured out how to express it. And they're looking at this guy who is like trying to express it constantly. I also think it's interesting, at least in the place where I grew up, part of white Protestant America's discomfort with alcoholism is sometimes also a discomfort with expressing strong emotions that you feel about something, maybe legitimate strong emotions, about trauma or about societal conditions or something.
Yeah.
It's just it's hard to untangle them. And I think here he does that really well. Again, we're like, sometimes he is maybe making a fool of himself, but we also have such a clear picture of where this frustration is coming from, where this, this like tragic sense of loss, grief, anger, all these things.
And he also bears the weight of being the only person of color in the film. I mean, he's surrounded by kind of this classic whiteness, this classic historical cinema, of the 40s and 50s, and just his character would have been a stereotype in all of these films. I mean,
there's that awful moment where some schmuck in a suit makes a joke about how, did you bring your tomahawk? And you should tell people that you did. And he has to just like smile and say, no, sir, and not choke this man to death. Like he has to find some way to. And
Doc and Rainey don't have to deal with that. They don't have to deal with that added layer of racism and, colonialist, the ghosts of colonialism and just, it makes it all the more tragic. And then also when the PR guy remembers that he may have passed Ira on the, right before Ira dies and the guilt of that. And he said, he said, I would have stopped, but I wasn't sure it was him and he was an Indian. Like the racism is just so ingrained. Like it's just not, it's so casual. And this is from someone who spent probably months with this guy.
We also see that scene where he's speaking to some group of Native men and they're all in suits and he's giving this speech that seems he basically has to say, like, as a result of the war, white people are going to see us with more humanity.
Yeah.
And you can tell, like, it doesn't seem like he means it. I don't know who wrote the speech for him. Nobody's buying it in the crowd. There's a series of speeches in this film that are like shitty. Like any of the PR, the kind of like stump speeches they give, they're bad. And there's a distinct like hesitation in the crowd before they start applauding because it's just there's no like emphatic conclusion, and so they have to figure, oh, it's over. I clap now, and this is one of those. But just the tragedy of this man not even being able to like have the respect of a community that sees him as a human being.
Yeah.
Even among Native people, he's a phony. And
well, there's that scene at the end, right, when the family drives up to the field and they takes the picture, and then the other worker
unbearable.
says, get my bags, hero, or something. So yeah. And the only time I noticed that Ira perks up is when he meets Truman. That's like the only time when you see him. Maybe whatever inspired him to join in the first place. Yeah, the patriotism, the nationalism. That's where it comes out a little bit with this kind of the figure of the presidency. And it's a short scene. But that's really the only time I've noticed that he's actually looks like this was all worth it.
That's interesting.
That moment where he's speaking to the organization is the National Congress of American Indians, which very famously was critiqued later by like 1960s youth American Indian and indigenous peoples organizations for being kind of like sellouty or assimilationist, which tragically, like you're saying, something that he suggests maybe was his goal, was to improve the white image of Native Americans, but it's not clear that he believes it or believes that that's possible.
Yeah.
And to your point, Glenn, I learned just reading about him a little bit that before the war, before he enlisted, he was in the Civilian Conservation Corps, which I think does kind of suggest this community mindedness you're talking about. This, I mean, could be lots of motivations for being involved in that, but this idea that maybe at the heart of it, there was a belief at some point that this was a worthwhile project.
Just going to do my little Stan Lee footnote here. True believers, if you want to learn more about some of the 60s and 70s Native radical movements, check out our episode on The Enforcer.
Yep.
Talk about the takeover of Alcatraz. There's some very cool shit going on. Since we're talking about representation and race, we should talk about Spike Lee briefly.
Sure.
One of the things people remember about this film is that Spike Lee, while at Cannes promoting and presenting his film Miracle at St. Anna, calls out Clint Eastwood specifically for this film's lack of black characters. Let me just read. There's a bit of back and forth. Look, neither of these men are that great at making public statements that don't cause further problems.
Yes. Right.
So Spike Lee says, Clint Eastwood made 2 films about Iwo Jima that ran for more than 4 hours total, and there was not one Negro actor on the screen. If you reporters had any balls, you'd ask him why. There's no way I know why he did that, but I know it was pointed out to him that he could have changed it. It's not like he didn't know. Many veterans, African Americans who survived that war are upset at Clint Eastwood. In his vision of Iwo Jima, Negro soldiers did not exist. Simple as that. I have a different version. His movie's not about Iwo Jima, by the way. It takes place in Tuscany.
Italy, yeah.
Yeah. Eastwood says, has he ever studied the history? He was complaining when I did Bird. Why would a white guy be doing that? I was the only guy who made it. That's why. He could have gone ahead and made it. Instead, he was making something else. Almost like very close to that. He did make Mo Better Blues, but I digress. Clint says that the black soldiers on Iwo Jima didn't raise the flag. This story is Flags of Our Fathers, the famous flag raising picture, and they didn't do that. If I go ahead and put an African-American actor in there, people go, this guy's lost his mind. I mean, it's not accurate. A guy like him should shut his face. That's sort of a problem.
Yes. Neither of these very composed public discourse engagers we're talking about necessarily.
And then Lee comes back. The man is not my father, and we're not on a plantation either. He's a great director. He makes his films. I make my films. The thing about it, though, I didn't personally attack him. And a comment like, a guy like that should shut his face. Come on, Clint, come on. He sounds like an angry old man right now. If he wishes, I could assemble African-American men who fought at Iwo Jima, and I'd like him to tell these guys what they did was insignificant and they did not exist. I'm not making this up. I know history, and I know the history of Hollywood and its omission of the 1 million African-American men and women who contributed to World War II. Not everything was John Wayne, baby. I never said he should show one of the other guys holding up the flag as black. I said that African-Americans played a significant part in Iwo Jima. For him to insinuate that I'm rewriting history and have one of the 4 guys with the flag be black, no one said that. It's just that there's not one black in either film, and because I know my history, that's why I made that observation. So, Spike Lee, as ever, has very salient points that he can't help but wrap in some stuff that makes it hard to take just the salient thing that he's saying without commenting on the other stuff. But yeah, I mean, I think in a film that is explicitly about images and the complicating of same, and also about who exactly was where, they both have good points. I should say Miracle at St. Anna, I haven't seen all of it. I've seen some of it, but it does literally open with, at that point, an old age makeup, one of the black soldier characters, like in the 60s or something, watching a John Wayne World War II movie and saying, like, we were there too. So clearly Spike makes a movie about this very point. But I don't know. How do we feel about the whole Spike Lee kerfuffle?
I mean, I think Spike is correct in his assertion that Hollywood has erased black people from the screen or created caricatures for decades that have limited mass populations' understanding of black communities and disenfranchised black communities. I mean, Hollywood is the most guilty party of that, like in kind of a mass culture. And I think that's where Spike is coming from, is that if you've studied silent cinema, if you studied the early years of Hollywood, I mean, it is blatantly enraging. I mean, like just what the history of, race and representation in Hollywood is all about. So I think he's coming from that place of just pure anger that there's this movie out there that is depicting World War II, and it admittedly a very homogenized white way. I mean, there's that really awkward cutaway to like the black troops that are just like sitting there watching, I think, the initial debrief, which is just, and they explicitly say, you guys are going there, you guys are going here. Right. This is where the movie's going. So I think Spike Lee is right to comment on it. I also think, Clint Eastwood set out to make a very specific type of movie, and he did. Right. And it's Spike Lee's right to make his counter movie to it. I mean, we see this example pop up throughout film history where, like Birth of a Nation is made, and then Oscar Micheaux makes, Within Our Gates. And so, I mean, it's just this idea that film can be a counter argument to itself. And so I think that's, Miracle of St. Anna is in many ways even more classically Hollywood than Flags of Our Fathers. Like, I think Flags of Our Fathers is far more experimental and interesting, but it has its own kind of magical realism to it. The Miracle of Anna does. So I think filmmakers get into these spats because they're upset about Hollywood as an institution.
Absolutely.
And I think for me, that's where it's not like saying one is right and one is wrong, but it's kind of understanding the way that Hollywood works and why it's so frustrating to these people who are obviously talented and obviously want to make movies for the right reasons. And, I truly believe that both of them are making movies for the right reasons and are both, masters of their craft.
Beautifully put. I think that's exactly right. And I think it's such a fair frustration to say, like, this is the next iteration of Hollywood cinema. This is the next entry. And certainly there's hundreds, thousands of entries every year. But to say, I'm looking at your film as a representation of this larger, extremely infuriating, like you're saying, problem. And Clint is defending it as this specific story I was trying to tell was not about that. And I think I understand why you want to say, hey, I was thinking about other things, but certainly I hope that thoughtful filmmakers are always, and I think I agree with you, Glenn, I think both guys are examples of this type of thinking, but questioning, all right, which elements of Hollywood, which currents am I playing into, am I reinforcing, even if that's not my intention, even if this is not an anti-black film, I would imagine Clint believes, which is why he's gesturing to things like Bird, trying to, like prove his well-meaningness or something. But it's not really how it works to say that, okay, well, Bird happens to be one of the few black-centric pictures that gets made every couple of years or whatever, every year, and doesn't push back the tide of predominant whiteness that we see, especially in historical narratives, things that a lot of the time people of color are erased from anyway, and to then see it in another iteration is, I think, just always going to be kind of frustrating.
This is it reminded me of a conversation that we had on our $1 Million Baby episode about some of the negative response from disability activists to that movie. And again, it's sort of a problem where if there are more films about black soldiers in World War II made by anybody, greenlit by white Hollywood, obviously, then this movie that doesn't include predominant black characters in a specific historical narrative doesn't stand out. But the problem is like a more systemic one, where because there are so few films that get made at all, and especially there are no other real great representations of Black World War II, this one as yet another example of a film that just elides that whole history is frustrating. And so the solution, I think, is not necessarily to yell at Clint Eastwood as much as it is to yell at, I don't know, the only person I can think of is Lou Wasserman. I think he's been dead for 300 years, but one of those guys.
Yeah.
Well, Spike's frustrations have been, he's voiced his frustrations with everyone from the Oscars to, different filmmakers, Tarantino. And I think I don't obviously know Spike Lee. I don't know what he's thinking, but I can only kind of ascertain that he feels like he needs to speak for, a certain community of filmmakers and black artists. And because he has the platform his, he sees that responsibility and that power and wants to take advantage of it as much as he can. Obviously, sometimes it comes across, not as like the most productive way, but I mean, I think that's Spike Lee in a nutshell.
Yeah.
And he did I just wanted to briefly mention that he went on to make The Five Bloods, which is another,
Bloods,
kind of war film dealing with this idea of memory, what's caught on film, what's, it was very textural, that sort of thing. So, I mean, he used that inspiration, I think, to make, which is, I think, a great film.
Absolutely. Yeah. And the Chadwick Boseman character in that film is very much like the Barry Pepper character in this one.
Very
Mike,
much,
like
very much. Almost
the guy
like,
they all look up to. Yep. Although he is in real life, the character was the real guy was 24.
Yeah.
So he was like the eldest of them. It's funny, in the actors can't help themselves but be completely embarrassing. They're talking about like how they were all of the guys in the fake platoon were looking up to Barry Pepper because he had this war experience of having been in Saving Private Ryan.
He's been to war.
Hate to hear this. This is
so fucking funny.
It really is embarrassing.
I also got to read this. Ryan Phillippe says, I would have been more than glad to die for this war effort for World War II.
Thank you so much.
Rhodes Scholar. Yeah.
Right around the time he was cheating on his wife, right? So.
Sure. I encourage him to do everything he can to go back in time to World War II. Go give it a shot. I do love Barry Pepper, though.
I was going to say, I think I liked his role better, although it's a slighter role in this film than in Saving Private Ryan. I'm not like a diehard Saving Private Ryan fan.
He's the sniper in that.
Yeah.
The guy who's always saying prayers and stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's within this film, he is lionized by the other members of his platoon or whatever his unit is. But I actually think he is very normal. So I think it actually comes across in a compelling way. Like, he's not some kind of special hero. They just have pushed him forward. And then the only thing he does is, I think it's with Neil McDonough or whomever he's talking to, who tries to promote him to platoon sergeant or something. He says, like, I promise to be with these guys. But it's kind of a modest thing, right? He's not actually expressing like some type of super heroic savior type complex.
Well, that scene especially made me think about something we will talk about on our Letters from Iwo Jima episode, but like the way that Japanese propaganda and the Japanese sort of military cultural output acknowledges the reality of death so much more, and so much of it is about like, the honor of dying for your country or dying for a cause. Whereas this one, he talks about how he tells all these men that they're going to see their mothers again, and he knows he's lying to half of them.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that, so much of what gets people to pay for war and go fight in the war and all these things on the American side is falsehood, is delusions of or illusions, I guess.
Because one's voluntary and the other's not. Like they're forcing that one scene where he's in Iwo Jima where he says, we have nothing left to sell them, tell them to go away, and then it's when he's drafted in, quote unquote drafted. It's tough. I mean, I feel like Barry Pepper, that's a really interesting point, because he does not, you never see him like killing 1 million people or like charging the line or anything. It's just the work, like, how can I do the work and save as many of these guys or inspire them as many of these guys as possible. I did want to ask you both, because one of the big post Private Ryan trends was like, how is violence depicted on screen in World War II? And so, like, in Flags of Our Fathers, what did you both make of? Because it's not the whole thing is not like about the war, but there are war scenes, which I found were pretty interesting in the way they were constructed.
Yeah, I thought you were going to reference specifically the beach taking scene. I did not like, because it also hews so much closer to, like we're talking about with Miracle of St. Anna, just like classic Hollywood war cinema. I want to give it credit because it's contextualized well, in the sense that it's maybe the 8th or 9th war scene by the time we get to that. There's so much lead up to it, and I think all those other scenes are so much better done. So I want to say that, to me, that makes it distinct from Saving Private Ryan, where we're getting a vision of like quote unquote action or something, like, war violence that doesn't have this sense of like heroics or a charge or, taking territory or nobility or these things that, unfortunately, we're not like necessarily huge fans of the Truffaut quote. But to me, this is the type of thing that it does apply to, where even if you're showing nasty stuff, there's so much implicit glory involved in like a beach taking scene that to me is not my favorite. But I will say that was still a minority, I think, of the total like soldiers on Iwo Jima or preparing time. And I think basically everything else I liked so much better. You know, they're sort of like weird, half relaxed hanging out at the top of the mountain, you know, when they're actually putting up this thing, which of course also undermines how heroic the moment is, but also it's like this mix of fear and also a little lapse, and they're sort of like joking around with each other. I think that stuff's nice. So again, I think that stands out separately to me. The only other thing I will say positively about the beach scene is, as the flip side of Letters from Iwo Jima, the sort of like faceless turrets and stuff. I did enjoy that because it's, you know, reflecting this idea of like totally dehumanizing your enemy, or, you know, there's very little recognition, but this tension that still exists between them.
Well, I'm going to give Ian a classic podcasty for me.
No.
I disagree with how he feels about this. I mean, I do agree strongly with you that the beach taking scene is so much more resonant and complicated when we see the terror of the enlisted Japanese men who are waiting for, because that's when the Ken Watanabe character takes especially long to give the order to fire. So they're all like, why are we, there's a bunch of guys with guns coming. Can we start fighting them yet? But I do also think that, you know, obviously the style is very indebted to the famous D-Day scene in Saving Private Ryan. But I think Clint leans even more into the stupidness and uncinematicness of the deaths, where so many guys are. I keep saying guys because in the making of stuff, everyone refers to the soldiers as these guys. You know, those guys, these guys. But there's so many people are in the middle of like a giving an order, or like, and then they just slump over, like they get shot or whatever. Or there's another really harrowing moment where a guy is sort of confused. There's I think a plane is strafing him or something, and there's some shots behind him, and he turns around like pretty slowly and confusedly, and then just gets ripped up by the bullets. Like there's no heroism to it at all. Yeah. I think the violence here, coupled with Letters from Iwo Jima, is of a different sort, where like the D-Day scene in Saving Private Ryan can be both harrowing and glorifying in a way. And it's like there's the whole thing where it's been like determined heroically disgusting in a way that can be shown on television without edits. Like the Saving Private Ryan has this special pass for being like too respected to be edited for television, and they let people say foobar or whatever. But I think here there's a different kind of miserable violence, especially given the diptych sort of structure of the two films. So Ian's wrong and I'm right.
Okay. The only thing I'll add is I was thinking about Thin Red Line, in part because they climb down the big rope thing on the side of the boat, which is maybe like the only 2 times I've seen that in cinema, and it's very memorable to me for whatever reason. I will say that Thin Red Line,
because it's like a child playground thing. Like it's something we have done. The only difference is that we didn't have a big backpack on.
Right, and the fact that it's being done on like the incredible number of ships that we see, which I would also just a side note is very effective to think about the size of like the infrastructure required for war and the amount of money required for bonds.
Yeah.
But just to say that in Thin Red Line, which I will say is obviously critically adored and I think deserves it, but is also maybe more Hollywoodish than people talk about it being. I think it is still pretty much in this continuum. But to me, that has basically zero appeal in the representation of how important it is to take this hill that I don't remember exactly what it's called. But to me, that comes across as so forced, so made up. You know, Nick Nolte, this like loser generals yelling at them to climb up, and they're just being strafed, and it's awful to look at, and people die alone and all these things. And I guess I just have a preference for, if I'm going to see this like, you know, pseudo heroic moments that I think happens all the time in war, probably realistically, I just want it to be as miserable as possible. So I think just if you can just turn up that knob, that's my preference.
For the Iwo Jima landing, I definitely thought it was, when I was watching it the first time, I was so close to like proximity to Private Ryan, only like 7 years. So we thought at the time everything was going to be like that. And so I was taken aback with how kind of classical the Iwo Jima scene is, in the sense that you really don't get the same level of individual moments of heroism. Like it's more just, it actually is more of just the suffering. That's all it is. I don't remember, other than the flamethrower guy, like there's really not a lot of individual showstoppers. It's more just like being pummeled from this strategic position that you're, I don't know. I found it to be actually quite unlike most beach scenes, but
that scene, the sequence where they're trying to take the little, is that what a pillbox is?
I think so. Yeah,
they're trying to take the little gun emplacement.
He fails.
He throws the grenade in, and then just more guys show up. Like that sequence goes on.
It's like, is there tunnels under there? Is there like,
that was my presumption.
It's intentionally like slow and arduous in a way that I think is effective.
And a fair point of comparison, because I think there's almost an identical sequence in Saving Private Ryan where they're also taking a pillbox, right? And it is kind of a triumphant thing.
Yeah.
And Clint also cuts, we just kind of get sort of I don't know, I think it might cut to a different period in time, but we don't like see the victory of the landing. You don't. Yeah. You get thrown into a day later or whatever when they're sort of relaxing. Yeah.
Well, you get a lot of like them dealing with the bodies, them trying to get bodies out of there as more bombs drop in, creating more body. Like it's just, it's like this quagmire that I think is really interesting for me. But it even, like when you watch Letters of Iwo Jima, it even becomes more nuanced and more like in terms of just what you're seeing, what you're not seeing.
Yeah, the flamethrower guy, his name is Alessandro something or other.
Crossover boy.
He's the only, he's basically, he and Yukari Black, I think, are the only characters or the only actors who are in both films. Mm-hmm. And Glenn, I'd love your take on this. Do we think that Clint is suggesting that these people never crossed paths with each other, or that because they would mean so little to one another that their faces wouldn't be recognizable to them, so perhaps some of the sort of unnamed stunt performers might in fact be representing some of the guys we see in Letters from Iwo Jima who die? How do you feel about this? This is, I guess it's a fan theory.
I think for me, Clint is definitely trying to avoid any sort of MCU crossover cameo, because I think he inherently knows this is going to be distracting. And Iwo Jima is much more of a classical, lyrical, poetic kind of slow burn versus the frenzied chaos of like memories exploding and Flags of Our Fathers. So it's definitely a different movie and a different style of movie too, different pace, different everything, even though they're working in conversation with each other. So my guess is that he just didn't want to create these overtones, these cameo of Ryan Phillippe or something like that. It just, it would distract from the Japanese side. And it's probably what you said, like their faces wouldn't mean anything. So why call attention to it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the only other few moments that qualifies maybe as close to a crossover is when they hear the Japanese men committing suicide by grenade and, wander into the caves. And I think you're right though, Glenn, that Clint artfully dances away from any kind of, oh, look how close the characters were or something, because also the moment is so emotionally rich where there's like a human sympathy for the Japanese, but also maybe kind of like a foreign orientalist sort of like, wow,
I can't believe these guys are capable of this.
And also just kind of a overwhelmed with gore at that point, right? So just to like see more suffering, sort of like apolitically or racially is just like too much for them. So all the dimensions seem much, much richer than just saying like, oh, look, these two films are nearly overlapping.
My famous podcast girlfriend pointed out that, and she works in a medical field, so maybe she would know. To her mind, this seemed like more guts than are in a person.
Interesting. Okay.
She thought that they may have upped maximum the gore factor.
Full Cronenberg right there. Just trying to.
But also, it isn't. I don't think she's ever encountered a grenaded body, so we don't know.
I also like the idea of you'll never really understand what was going on. Like from your perspective, you're limited to what you're seeing, especially in a very traumatic kind of wartime situation, and this speaks to the idea of like trying to make sense of history from not even just in the moment, but from 30 years, 40 years down the road. So there is, even though the films are like in conversation with each other, there's always this distance between the two of them. It's like he's very afraid to make this overt like overlap, because history itself we're never going to know kind of what really happened. And so I think it's respectful of that absence, that distance, that kind of between the two experiences.
Yeah, I think he's saying that we don't even understand our own side very accurately. So it would be such a lie to imagine that we understand the other side at all.
Yeah, for sure.
It's interesting in the and I, by the way, to the listener, I am trying to say it's interesting less on the show.
But it's so interesting. It's hard.
Yeah.
So many things are so interesting. The James Bradley and a number of other people, like some of the actors who are pretending that they did a bunch of research for this, they always make sure to mention not the bravery, but like the ferocity, I guess, or the profound effort that was put forward by the Japanese soldiers. Like, it seems like, I don't know if this is because this PR is in part for the other film, or if this is just sort of a broader consensus position by 2005, 2006, that we should acknowledge that the Japanese fighting men were at the very least a formidable enemy and deserve some level of respect for fighting so goodly. You know,
I think that had come about in Vietnam, post-Vietnam. Yeah. I feel like the men who fought in Vietnam, you hear that a lot about this kind of fact that both, like survival itself was kind of a mode of respect, or just like kind of
right.
I think that's when I first noticed it in history, like, because before that it's like it's blatantly like racism, hatred.
Yep.
Yeah.
So I think there's an element of that for sure, especially by the time the Bush era. Like, I mean, there's this facade, this artifice of like trying to acknowledge the other side.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wonder, because this movie struck me as, especially with the ending, the one that Ian said was dog shit and was so bad and he hated it. With the ending, it ends with a sentiment that I associate a lot more with Vietnam movies, talking about, fighting not for your country, but for your buddies, for the man next to you and in front of you and whatever. I did just rewatch Big Lebowski like a couple of days ago, so I was thinking about John Goodman saying, this boy's dying face down in the muck at Khe Sanh. But there is a more Vietnam-esque, or Vietnam movie-esque specifically, like focus on these social relationships, and it's a much more micro level depiction of what World War II is so often like a macro. It's understood in these big movements because it is, this unprecedented mobilization of all kinds of forces, military and economic and what have you. And this movie does get into that. Like, I was impressed how much it is about like, hey, we're fucking broke. Like, we're out of money to make ships and stuff. We need to beg for more money. But there is kind of a Vietnam, it certainly is a post-Vietnam movie in a bunch of ways to me. And I wonder also if there's anything to be drawn from it coming out in this Iraq and Afghanistan moment where, look, the guys over there, a lot of the 18-year-olds from shitty parts of the country who this is their best option are not the biggest ideological enemy in this moment. They're mostly thinking about the guy next to them. I don't know. What do you guys draw from this?
Yeah, I think, it is the Iraq years, the post 2001, post 9/11 years produced some very strange movies. And
sure. William Broyles also wrote Jarhead, by the way.
Yeah, another very strange movie.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think if you look at Private Ryan as the pre-2001 kind of like version of this.
Oh, I should say, sorry to interrupt, Broyles was a Marine in Vietnam. I think that might bear something on the conversation.
If you see like Private Ryan as this kind of full throttle, like into this visceral 16 millimeter style jarring, like puts you into this video game of World War II, right? That's the pre 9/11. And then post 9/11, it's like, we got to figure out another way to make this a little bit more nuanced, not as focused on the violence, because I feel like I feel like Clint is definitely interested in the inner workings of how the guys talk to each other, their relationships with each other. And even if it's just a moment or two, it's still, there's a lot of effort, I think, put into, especially for a director who famously does one take or whatever. Like, it's just, there's a lot of thought, and the performances are even really, some of his films have really bad performances, and you can see, like, especially in the later ones. But I found that these performances were always very well earned and just kind of very well depicted in terms of the camaraderie. So he builds up to that final moment, I think, in a way that makes it more profound. And this could have easily been just the most greatest generation-y movie of all time, right?
Yeah.
And it's not. It really isn't. Like, I know that, Ian, you mentioned a lot of the moments that turned you off, and those moments are definitely there for me. I just found that they were often overwhelmed by these far more nuanced, far more complicated dealings with kind of who the Greatest Generation was, and like the implications of their inability to talk about things, and just how that, and then their country not being able to talk about it either. There's just, I like movies like in terms of that are just a lot more prickly, and I feel like Clint does prickly really well.
Yeah, just to underline something that's maybe obvious, but part of the subjective experience of art is just like the degree to which one element that you maybe like or dislike undermines another element for you. And I think I am supporting you here, where I think for me the frustration about the film, which I will still say I enjoyed overall, but is because I think he is presenting this nuance sometimes, and then for me it's enough of a turnoff when it feels like there's these slight betrayals to it. But I also think it's a totally legitimate viewing experience to just say like, okay, I can just kind of let those moments slip past me and focus on the things that feel like complications, that feel rich, that make the movie worthwhile. So
totally,
I think it's entirely reasonable. And just to be clear, the swimming stuff is fine. It was just the
Ian likes swimming,
surging strings, looking at father's little box in the attic,
sure.
And then going to see him. And saying,
Clint does the music on this one. It's a nice little repeated motif, I think, but as we've talked about, it does feel like a guy's like third film score. It's not Michael Giacchino doing like a million things at once or whatever.
Not, yeah.
I wanted to shout out, I haven't mentioned Benjamin Walker as Harlan Block. He's the guy whose mom recognizes her son's bottom, which I think it's funny. It's one of those things that, how many other mothers thought that they saw their son's bottom in the photo who were wrong, kind of a thing. Like, sure, I guess this happened, but whatever. But anyway, that guy who I thought, man, this guy looks a lot like a young Liam Neeson, played young Alfred Kinsey in the film Kinsey, starring Liam Neeson as old Alfred Kinsey. He's also Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, one of the worst films I've seen in a movie theater. Saw it at the Man's Chinese Theater here in Los Angeles.
Bad movie.
It was in English, interestingly, despite being in the... And then also want to shout out, I don't know if it's Harv Presnell or Harvey Presnell, the guy with the white mustache. He's one of the first people that Tom McCarthy talks to. He plays the elder version of the Neil McDonough character. He is in Fargo, but he's also in Saving Private Ryan, which is another film about, like, largely about a PR move during World War II, but conveniently forgets that in the face of talking about the heroism. Like, this movie it sticks with the irony of the PR. But Harv Presnell was also in Paint Your Wagon with Clint, so a nice little
going way back
reunion. Also, this is apropos of nothing. Did you guys know that Tom McCarthy directed an unaired Game of Thrones pilot that was like thrown out?
Like he's directed for a lot HBO, or you mean he like
for HBO? Like Benioff,
I would love that
with paper mache backgrounds and stuff.
Yeah. That would be great. But no, Tom McCarthy was like the first guy that they brought on to direct the pilot, and it was apparently so bad they threw it out entirely.
Yikes. Okay. All right.
He's also has a very prominent role in Roland Emmerich's 2012, which is like deep into his, like, he's already directed a movie at this point. He's directed The Station Agent. Yeah. Then he makes a couple, like, he's made one or two more movies, and then it's like a featured, he's John Cusack's ex-wife, Amanda Peet's new husband.
I remember this. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I'm like, that's the fucking Spotlight guy.
Yeah.
Anyway, that movie's kind of good. I kind of like 2012. I did want to say it is, to me, particularly meaningful to be talking about this film at this moment where as we record this, Israel is ethnically cleansing the people of Palestine and using images so often like out of their proper context to induce these emotional responses that are sometimes like exactly the opposite of what the image should be conveying.
Publishing Palestinian children with bomb debris on them and stuff.
Justin Bieber posting an Instagram meme that says "Pray for Israel" over a photo of bombed out Gaza. And so, this shit still happens. It's still hugely important to know where your image is provenanced and also consider what's being done with it. I'm going to do one of my classic Jake inflammatory takes here.
Okay.
A lot of people compare, there's an image taken on September 11th, 2001. Have you ever heard of it? That is referred to as a sort of like restaging of this photograph called Raising the Flag at Ground Zero, of some firefighters raising a flag in the midst of a bunch of rubble of the World Trade Center. Taken by a guy named Thomas E. Franklin for the Record newspaper of Bergen County, New Jersey. I think this photograph sucks shit. I think it's a bad picture. I think it's stupid. I don't know why they're putting the flag back up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I assume they waited until they didn't have anything more pressing to do than to put the flag back up.
Yeah.
But it's also just like, this one guy's just looking. He's standing there, like, watching. I'm going to send this image to you guys in the chat here. I don't know if you remember this.
Well, I would just say while we're pulling it up, one of the highlights of the film for me is also just like the very dry elements of Robert Patrick getting mad because like somebody else is going to take the flag, and he says like, something like "fuck those guys."
Those are the flags, right? Of the title, the flags of our father are the two flags. I assume. Okay.
And there's probably like more of a general, like, you know, the flags that they fought for kind of thing, you know, but you're right. I think it's the two.
So what do you guys think of this?
I mean, this picture's nothing kind of, it's just the elements you're describing. The power just comes from thinking of firefighters and 9/11. The picture itself is,
I think what's powerful is the background. I mean, just just the scale of the rubble.
There's literally like smoke and dust in the air behind them.
Well, and like, let's say the size of like this beams being 5 times bigger than the pole.
Yeah.
Well, just, I think we've talked a little bit about propaganda, but I mean, what you were just mentioning, Jake, like the idea of propaganda being weaponized, being utilized to scare people, to, you know, kind of otherize people, and just kind of to create this groundswell of support, but also to create division. And I think that this film takes a very subtle approach. I mean, there's some moments like that where propaganda is very specifically like being critiqued, but I think just the slow burn of propaganda and how it takes its toll really interested me about this movie, and just how it erodes the very reasons we've gotten involved in the things that we do, you know, and just especially Ira, and especially, you know, Doc is kind of a little bit immune to it, a little bit more. And then Rainey just kind of embraces it, and look where that gets him. Like, it's just this mechanism of propaganda, especially when wielded by the government, it really is like no one wins from this. Like there's nothing good that comes out of any of it.
Yeah. I mean, I think the moment where Ira is just inconsolably hugging Mike's mom, and the fact that the stuffed shirt guys are like uncomfortable with this, just shows how much this propaganda machine and the image preservation machine, how much that has nothing to do with the needs of soldiers, the needs of individuals engaged in this war effort. It's often like diametrically opposed. And, you know, maybe they hadn't named PTSD yet, but the very idea of making a paper mache mountain for these guys to reclimb on something called Soldier Field. They shot this at the Rose Bowl, by the way. Shout out to Pasadena, California. But the idea of like forcing them to relive this trauma with fireworks screaming overhead is, you know, insane, patently insane. Also recalls an unusual film, Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk, which is basically about this moment. Yeah, pretty interesting, pretty fascinating movie. I recommend everybody check out in as many frames per second as they can find.
That's a really good post like Iraq War for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think this is a natural crossover choice for a subject for a film, because historically war bonds, I mean, it's basically, they are obviously instituted by the government and promoted by either soldiers themselves, like you're saying, which weirdly turns their real experiences into simulacra or like falsehoods, or, you know, this kind of targeted goal, or like Hollywood actor types, right? So I think in World War II and World War I, you had like Charlie Chaplin and people the U.S. was paying to go out and stump for war bonds. So it's basically taking the fake people, the Ryan Phillippe style people, and turning them into actual precursors to weapons, basically weaponizing their celebrity status, their association with fantasy, and turning that
Pat Tillman style.
Exactly. Yeah. Or non Pat Tillman style. Yeah.
Yeah.
as a point of interest, I was reading about these like Series E war bonds, and apparently the guy that they hired just to show the level of thought they're putting into this, the Secretary of the Treasury for Roosevelt hired like a Reed College professor, like a pretty liberal
Was
guy.
it the naked guy? Reed College famously has a professor who lectures nude.
This. Okay.
You ever do that, Glenn? You ever pull one of those?
No.
Something to think about.
No.
Yeah, something to think about, certainly. But yeah, I mean, you could probably imagine Glenn like this guy later was opposed to the House Un-American Activities Committee, and he was like, a kind of reasonable liberal guy, but was picked because he was pushing for the idea of like less obvious otherization. So sort of like scheming at a higher level of saying like, well, we know the American public is now smart enough to see past this stuff where we're like, propagandizing real tragedy or just trying to villainize the people we're fighting against. So now we have to take the level of rhetoric to like even a finer degree to make sure that they are buying into this. Basically every movie now recognizing that the viewer is like an irony aware, trope aware film fan, and saying, okay, well, for these war bonds, we're like winking at you, winking at us, making sure you understand. Right. Yeah. And also you still have to give us money to go to war.
There's that reflexive nature of it, which is kind of predating the boom advertising of like the 1950s and 1960s and stuff, where it's constantly having to change and pivot your strategy
respond to a response.
Mm-hmm. Something particularly eerie to me watching this movie is the way that the guy, the like real estate guy who gives his card to Rainey Gagnon, who then ghosts him.
Mm-hmm. So pathetic.
Seems to already know.
It's really sad.
Yeah, he seems to already know that like there will be a big post-war boom. Like he gets the special economic updates that only certain people do, and he knows that like, hey, who gives a shit about winning the war? We got to get in on this prefab homes thing that's coming next, and it's something. So like the way even the war is a semi-manufactured piece of imagery. I don't know. Maybe I should become like a World War II never happened guy. Remember when that lady got viral for saying that ancient Rome didn't exist? Did you guys see this?
That
was crazy.
This. Yeah.
The Rainey stuff, we haven't talked a lot about him, and rightfully so. But I think what his situation brings up is this idea of like the small time and the big time overlapping, and him being naive enough to think that he could be big time. Even though he's like destined to be small time, like all the soldiers are destined to just basically exist in this pool over here, whereas people who are using them are existing like in this much more privileged with access, with knowledge, with with the intelligence reports. All they're just playing at another different level of chess. And this movie is in many ways about the soldiers realizing that and realizing that they are going to be left behind. Yeah, and no matter
there's that moment where like they find out that their ship has started shelling Mount Suribachi because there's big loud noises going on, and they have to go up on deck to figure out like what's that noise.
I love this, this total ignorance about what is actually happening, who's going where. Yeah, I think this is a good war literature. Almost always highlights that.
And Iggy coming down, going like, "Hey, we're first off the boat."
Like that's good. Yeah, yeah. Oh, there's a Roger Ebert quotation that I want to look up. Maybe I'm not going to be able to find it. I believe it was Ebert who said that A, war pictures are about war with a capital W, and B, war pictures are about soldiers. And he prefers the latter. Yeah. I think he was especially talking about like The Big Red One or like The Steel Helmet, like Sam Fuller type movies. But I think this is another sort of an A war picture in that Spielberg is producing it, and it's half Amblin, half Malpaso. And even DreamWorks distributes it domestically, and Warner Brothers internationally. It's like a huge undertaking, and yet it has this kind of smaller scale focus, even if the enormity of the war machine is on display and being represented here. Do we have any? I think we're kind of coming to the end of our chat. Are there any big points anybody would like to get to, or small points?
I just wanted to, I think what struck me, and every time I've watched this film, is the way that it creates the environment of Iwo Jima and Suribachi, and the colors, how everything's been drained. And I think this is Tom Stern, right? Did Tom Stern shoot this?
Yeah. Tom Stern shot this.
Just the achievement of shooting kind of this gray, black, charcoal.
Right.
And it's not just, the sand, the way the sand cakes their skin. There's such a level of attention, like detail put to the way that those scenes are kind of constructed that it kind of feels more real than even the stuff back home, which feels very, very artificial. Like everything back home feels like kind
it's
of
like glossy, and
there's a way that
it's a very strange dichotomy, which I really love about this film.
There's a way that the sort of unreality of the not the world's best like CGI compositing of crowds in Times Square or whatever, there's a way it kind of works to the film's advantage where it's supposed to feel unnatural, you know?
Yeah, but I agree, Glenn, because I think this is a very similar shooting style, the American side of things, I should say, when they're back home, to $1 Million Baby, where I didn't love it because the gloss sort of feels like it's covering like what would be texture, right? What would be giving this like richness to something. But here it makes sense because it's about the gloss that's, like smeared on these things. But I couldn't quite figure out what it was, but I did enjoy this clear contrast in terms of like how it's lit, a lot of medium shots, the sort of like depth on the characters that fades into blurriness in the background.
Have either of you ever been to the Marine Memorial in Washington, D.C.?
I have not.
I think I've been twice. I don't know if I went the first time, but I think I did go the second time. Must have been in high school, like a junior in high school.
Right. I've been to it once, despite having lived in Northern Virginia for almost 10 years. But the first time I ever went to D.C., like as a tourist, we were on a bus that took us around all the stuff. And the you can kind of see it in the background of the scene where they're at the unveiling of it. But there's a big circular bus route around the memorial. And supposedly, when you drive around, it gives the optical illusion that the flag is raising. This is fucked. This is so stupid. It's like the famous Mona Lisa like follows you around the room shit. Like, no, it doesn't. I'm not a bird. I can tell that the flag isn't moving. Anyway, all memorials generally are creepy and eerie, and I don't care.
Although to find out that also it was modeled off these three guys' faces, and then to have it turn out that two of them were not the people involved, I think.
The power of
poetic.
I think Slattery's wrong. Like part of the power of the image is that you can't see their faces. They are little green army men, but also that's fucked, you know?
Yeah.
And if anyone's mad that I said army men when they're Marines, I invite you to stop listening to the show.
That actually segues into the only other point I wanted to make. You obliquely referenced Tokyo Rose earlier, Jake, and that was a moment that I liked a lot because on the one hand, yes, it's obviously whatever you call reverse propaganda, right? Where it's trying to like make them less brave and activate their selfish survival instincts and stuff. But I enjoyed that a lot of what she's saying is also just like rehumanizing them, just like turning them into individuals with loved ones. And like you're saying, reminded them that if they die, they will not see these people again. So
like you're getting cucked.
Like, exactly. That was a big part of it. Yes. Yeah. So I appreciate that the bad, evil things that are going to make our soldiers worse are also maybe like accidentally respectful to their personal identities.
Yeah. I think the movie's a masterwork. I think it's extremely unique as a war movie in being so much about bullshit. I think it does what Billy Lynn's Long Halftime Walk is trying to do much more successfully and in far fewer frames per second. Not that, shout out to Ang Lee. I think he's brilliant and he's invited on the podcast whenever he wants to come. But yeah, I love this movie. I was blown away by it. I didn't expect to be, but this is it's probably in the top 5. We're gonna have to do the top 5. We're gonna have to update our top 5 soon, Ian.
Well, there's only like 10 films left, so we can wait maybe.
Yeah,
probably. Top 5, is that right?
Do you have a top 5 handy?
Oh, let me pull up the old IMDb here real quick. There's too many of them. Course.
Yeah, man's prolific.
I famously, famous to me.
Jake's constantly saying he's famously doing stuff, so it's okay. You have permission.
I was the film critic for the UCSB paper, the college-wide paper, my senior year, and what was
it called?
The Guardian, I think. I think so. One of my first assignments was Mystic River, and
oh shit,
I watched it on a Friday night. And then I was like, crap, I need to go watch this again. So I watched it twice in the first weekend. I don't know why I remembered that, but it was for a long time one of my favorites, but it isn't anymore. I think Perfect World would be number 1. Flags of Our Fathers is 2. White Hunter Black Heart is up there.
Yeah.
Bridges of Madison County is up there. Sudden Impact is up there. Bronco Billy.
Yeah.
Some Bronco Billy love.
Josie Wales. And then for one that he didn't direct, Thunderbolt and Lightfoot, I think he's incredible in that.
Wow.
Yeah, interesting.
That's surprising to me. Was your second Thunderbolt and Lightfoot defender to come on the podcast?
There's a 4K coming out. Oh, man. Interestingly.
Maybe we have to watch
Thunderbolt and Lightfoot. Yeah.
Okay.
Gonna have to rewatch it.
And Honky Tonk Man.
Really
good too.
Yeah. The guy's made a lot of great movies, huh? One thing we can all agree, it's a good topic for a podcast.
Yeah, no, I was really honored to be asked to come on because Clint is definitely
the honor is all ours.
Someone I think fondly of.
Yeah, we love the man. We wish him
I don't
well.
want to say you're deserving because that's almost accidentally insulting the idea that we would be able to tell you that
deserve
you're
to go on hey, let's say this. Yeah. You deserve to guest on a good Clint Eastwood podcast.
Yes, that's whatever that means. To say. Yeah. Yes, and sometime in the future.
Speaking of how it's a bad podcast, I have a couple pieces of bullshit to get through. I have a new segment idea, first of all. Okay. Actually, I have a new segment. Let's say it that way. This is the new segment. Whereas now, therefore, be it resolved. And there's a noise that goes with that, which is the Taco Bell bell. So I'm gonna make a podcasty for me official proclamation, and then at the end of it, Ian, you're gonna say whether or not you're gonna sign this. Okay.
Okay. All right. Sounds insane and arch. I love it.
Whereas its portrayal of a janitorial worker is sympathetic, dimensional, and nuanced. And whereas the criminally undervalued comedic performer Jamie Presley has a prominent role in which she is given the opportunity to be very funny. And whereas it features Flags of Our Fathers star Adam Beach as an unsuccessful fireworks salesman named Kickin' Wing, whose story, in a rare move for a Hollywood film, grants a native character an unequivocal happy ending when he becomes a successful fireworks salesman. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the 2001 Denny Gordon film Joe Dirt is actually kind of good. Are you signing on this proclamation?
Can I sign with like an explanatory qualification?
Sure, yeah.
That I sure had a great time when I had to start to fold my own laundry. One of the things we were told to do in my family when you were in 8th grade and Joe Dirt was on TV and you were folding your laundry. That's a good time. I sign that. That's my specific signature.
Beautiful. All right. I should say, Ian, next time you're on an airplane, I encourage you to download Joe Dirt to your computer and watch Joe Dirt on the airplane. He's a wonderful airplane companion. Christopher Walken is faking his own death, but then Joe Dirt's just talking about a sexy lady, and Christopher Walken gets an erection under the sheet on the gurney. Come on, it's a good movie. All right, that's now therefore be it resolved. Whereas now therefore be it resolved. Excuse me. So if you guys like that, continue to not tell us. And then Ian, you had something that you have to do. Did you see my text about this?
No, I don't think I did see your text about this. My phone's dead, so this is a good twist. I will not be.
You gotta rake me over the coals. You gotta read the email.
Oh, I know which email you're talking about. Although you're in charge of administration here. Happy to read this. I've previously offered to read emails of this variety. Is this what you're talking about?
Yes, it's an email sent in by a
incensed listener.
I guess maybe former friend of the show. Yeah.
Okay. All right, let me pull up the email here. Yeah, I got it. I mean, it'll be funny if this isn't the email you're talking about. It's just going to give Glenn some real personal insight into your home life here.
No, that's that one. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not your landlord, is it?
No. Well, not yet. Not yet.
Okay, so we got an email this week. Love to hear from our listeners. It's a delight. Please. It's brutally honest as you like to be. Feel free to reach out.
Yeah. Podcastingforme@gmail.com. Our inbox is always open.
Yes, correct.
But never full.
We upgraded. That's also true. Yeah.
Yeah, we gave Google an extra $1 a month or whatever, so we have more space for emails.
Former fan of the show, Amanda B, writes in, and she says, Jake tried to claim that he has a shelf and a half of Bosch books to impress Molly Lambert, even though I've purchased and read literally every single one of them. And of course, our response to this was, yes, Jake is fired from the show and he will be blown up like one of these guys on the beach.
That was to me. Yeah. So, yeah, my girlfriend pointed out that I said that I have a shelf of all the Bosch books when in fact they are her Bosch books. And I did buy, I think I got her I'm going to get in trouble again. I'm pretty sure I bought the first one.
Okay.
And was like, hey, these are supposed to be good. And then she's read all of them, and I've read like 4 of them because I have a bunch of different problems with my brain. So
yeah, that's cool. I mean, I think it's nice. Yeah. You're like standing near UCLA saying like, I have a big library back there if you want to check it out. That's
exactly.
a foolish lie to make you look good. That's cool.
That's why they call it a library. I'm in trouble. Not doing well. Sleeping, not even outside. I have to like go further away from the apartment. No.
Okay.
She's, you know how they say they're sometimes people refer to their partner as their better half. Mm-hmm. She's the whole damn good part. There's no half for me, you know? It's just I'm like kind of a remora.
Hanging off.
And I'm lucky if there's any parasites that I get to munch on or whatever. I'm a very clean person. Anyway, we're getting out of this now. Thanks again, Glenn, for being on the show.
Thank you, Glenn. What a delight.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me.
But I want to talk about the San Diego Asian Film Festival that's coming up very shortly as we record this and as it comes out. What's going on?
So our 24th edition, the San Diego Asian Film Festival, is November 2nd through the 11th. And we're going to be screening films all over San Diego, Balboa Park, Mira Mesa, UCSD. So yeah, there's like over 130, 140 movies that we're screening, shorts, features, documentaries.
Any highlights?
Gosh, I'm on the operations side, so I don't get to.
Any highlights of like how many chairs are in one venue?
Yeah, we have 185 seats in one theater, and we've got 4 theaters going. Go. So we've got new films by Koreeda, 2 by Hong Sang-soo.
Oh my god!
Hamaguchi's new one. So there's it's just all
Kim Ji-woon.
Another the new An Hui, and I think An Hui is going to be here in person.
Holy shit!
Which is big.
Very cool.
Her new film Elegies will be here. So yeah, I mean, it's if you're in the area, Jake, like you had said, maybe come on down and the films are
on the hook. I got to drive down.
They're always fun. I mean, it's a big event just in terms of operationally. Like if you think planning a war is hard, planning a film festival is probably not as hard. Yeah. But some of the similar overlaps in terms of just logistics and operations and stuff. That's venues, personnel, that sort of thing. So we're excited. We're going to be starting up with a movie called Quiz Lady that has Sandra Oh in it. So that'll be our opening night film, and it'll be 9 days after that. So it'll be fun.
Sweet. That sounds awesome.
Yeah. If people have not been to a film festival before, it's just fun to be in like the community aspect of film. I think film is often so isolating when experienced as art. I mean, we can be in a theater, but it's rare that you're in conversation with people. So to really highlight that and have people interested in debating and enjoying, and it's so much fun.
Definitely.
And that's why we had you on for
Flags
my
fathers.
Well, sweet. And then is there anywhere else that people can find out stuff that you're working on, read your writing, anything like that?
Oh, well, my Twitter got hacked about 6 months ago. It was, I had all of my stuff there. It got hacked. So I have a new Twitter. It's still at Matchcuts, MATCHCUTS, but far less followers, far less in terms of reviewing. I haven't been reviewing very regularly lately just because of 2 kids at home, multiple jobs. I did just start a new job, which I needed another one. I'm actually curating the Digital Gym Cinema down here in San Diego. It's a micro cinema, so I've taken on the role of artistic director to kind of curate and bring films to San Diego. So we're opening a film called The Delinquents. I don't know if you've heard of it. It was at Cannes this year. 3-hour Argentinian film. It's really good. If you haven't had a chance to see The Delinquents and you're in San Diego, November 3rd, come on down.
Great.
Sweet.
Yeah.
All right. Well, it's an embarrassment of riches down there in San Diego.
We're trying to show as much good stuff as we can.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. Thanks for telling us about it.
All right. Thank you both. Appreciate it.
Pleasure is all ours. At least mine. Ian was saying he doesn't want to do this, and he's like, who is this guy?
Well, if you know anybody who has a Koreeda podcast, I would be happy to immediately
you're ready to jump ship.
Yeah. I did recently talk about my experience shoplifting on this podcast. So sort of
that's true.
Connection.
Yep.
Anyway, remember to subscribe, rate us, write a review. It helps us on the algorithm. If you like the show, tell a friend, tell your dad, never tell anyone, put all your stuff in a box. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Podcastiforme if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, or you're interested in co-hosting a 2-person Clint Eastwood podcast. You can email us at podcastiforme@gmail.com. All of this and more is at podcastiforme.com. Actually, not more. It's all of this exclusively is at podcastiforme.com.
Nothing
also,
more.
No more.
At shootingyourselfinthehead.com, we own that URL as well. Thank you to Jeremy Allison for our artwork. Next week, talking Letters from Iwo Jima. We would be criminal if we did not do that next. And if you want to watch that, well, we forgot to do our whole where to watch this movie thing. It's on the internet. Go find it.
Yep.
Do your own homework. Letters from Iwo Jima is also available to rent and stream and stuff all over the place here in the United States. And I assume down there in Mexico.
Yeah. Amazon, okay. Microsoft, Apple TV.
Yeah, they call it something else down there. Anyway, finally, we did a good episode of the show. Just kidding to all the other guests, but I thought this one was great.
Thanks, everybody. Create a combative relationship with both audience and guests.
Hey, I've talked about co-host. Mike Mitchell before. You gotta,
Yep.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. We will catch you next time. Where's the fucking thing? What place the